Erev Tov Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. It is a very tumultuous day here on March 10th, 2018, as we look at different things that are happening across the globe, but more particularly, Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated on Instagram, Israel is the nation state of Jews alone. This was something that he was responding to a TV star who said Arabs are equal citizens. And I'm going to jump over to the Jerusalem Post, so to kind of go more into this article here, because it was a girl there, this young lady right here, that actually started this off, that said that Arabs are equal citizens. And I do agree with her on her statement there, as far as Arabs being equal citizens, and as well as the Druze community, people, period. It should be an equality inside of Israel. And but Miss Gadot, who is on the left side right here, which many of you may know her from the movie Wonder Woman that she played in recently, she actually really comes in and makes the most provocative statement. It made me wonder if she doesn't listen to Israeli News Live. She said in response, when she was taking up for her friend there, Miss Rodam Sila, the actress Gal Gadot, she steps in and says, it states right here, love thy neighbor as thyself. She wrote that in Hebrew on the top of a screenshot of Sila's original post. It's not an issue of the right or left, Jew or Arab, secular or religious. It's an issue of dialogue. And in reality, how are we ever going to have peace in Israel if we turn around and say it is a Jewish state only? I mean, even for the sake of the children of Israel, we're supposed to be children of Israel, right? Children of Israel, unless I have forgotten for some reason, Israel had 12 sons, all right? The mothers of all of these sons, whether it be Leah, whether it be Rachel, Bilhah, or Hilda, every one of the mothers of Israel were all Syrians. So our neighbors right across the road are our family and our kindred as well in Syria. And Palestinians and even the Jordanians, I mean, these are offshoots of Abraham's children as well. So these are all of our family members. I mean, if we look at the biblical side of this, from the Nile River all the way to the Euphrates, we have distant relatives living in all of these lands right here. Now, granted, not everybody is there for peace. I realize there are radical people in the Palestinian groups, but we got radical people in the Israeli government that is willing to take and wage war rather than trying to wage peace and dialogue with our neighbors. So truly, we need to love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, I think it's fascinating because Miss Gadot here is actually quoting from Leviticus, and what she may not even realize is that sometimes they try to use that as being that, well, it's only the Jews that we should love. But again, like I said, we're supposed to be 12 tribes, not 3. Or in this case, not even 1, because Jew, the word Jew comes from Judah, or the house of Judah, which consisted of the Levites, Benjamites, and the Judites at that time. What about the other 10 tribes that are still to return home? Where is their place? In fact, we're commanded, we're not allowed to even move our stake for your family heritage. You're not allowed to move it. That's a biblical command by Moses himself. Not to move your stake for every tribe, etc. In fact, let me just show you some ancient maps here, all right? So, because there's another issue we're going to talk about here in a little bit, okay? Israel map, biblical times, all right? When Joshua came in, for example, right? That's what we want to look at. What was it like when Joshua came in and he divided up the land? So we'll put Joshua's name in there. We'll click on images there. And this will give us a little idea of how Joshua divided up the land. We'll try to get a color, maybe a color image in here to look at this. All right, maybe this one here, Canaan. All right, don't know how well we can see all this here. Let me just save the image here real quick. And that way I can just pop it up on the screen, get a little bit bigger here for you. All right, so now Some disputed areas already we can see there. But if, as you notice here, Benjamin and Judah, if we actually, let's see, that's Ephraim, Manasseh, Ishkar. Where's poor Judah at on the map here? Ephraim, Benjamin. Okay, way down here. All right. Judah is down here to the south of Jerusalem, basically even south of Joppa. Dan would be part of the tribe of the northern tribes there, the house of Israel. Ephraim is the house of Israel. So basically all of southern Israel would belong to the house of Judah, and all of northern Israel would belong to the house of, as far as that would be the house of Israel. And which we should be one nation, not two different nations. But if you'll notice though, those tribes, it should be southern. So what are we doing moving our stakes, taking up all the land up over in here? And Manasseh, the Golan, what we call today the Golan Heights, would actually belong to Manasseh. How do we know that Manasseh is not partially living in Syria? We forget about the Ephraim, Damascus being a fortress for Ephraim, and that on the near verge of fall, which the Ephraimites ended up believing that Yeshua, Jesus, was the Messiah. And God even says in Isaiah 17, he upbraids the Israelite people that have been dispersed for all these years, both houses, house of Judah and house of Israel, for the demise of Damascus in verse 10, when he says, you forgot the God of your salvation, and you do not remember the rock. See, let me just show that to you, because we're here at it. We're speaking about love your neighbor as yourself. So I think it's worth to take the time real quick to look at this, and then we're going to jump back into some other issues here, and we'll get into more news here in just one second here. But Isaiah 17, because they're going to destroy Damascus. It's coming. It is coming, right? And I think that Putin is going to play right into the game, and probably doing it with a full knowledge of it, right? So the burden of Damascus is taken away from being a city and has become a ruinous heap. The cities of Aurora are forsaken, they shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Aram, or the remnant of Syria, shall be as the glory of the children of Israel. Yeah, they've already gone into exile. Many of the Syrians are dispersed all over the world now, just like the children of Israel were. And Ephraim, that fortress, because why? President Bashar al-Assad, who descendants of the mothers of Israel, has taken up for the Christian community in Syria. Right? Now we get down to verse 10, and we find out, for thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation. This is why this happens, right? You forgot the God of your salvation. Thou hast not been mindful of the rock of thy stronghold. Therefore thou didst plant pleasantness, and did set it with slips of a stranger. In other words, you went in there and armed a bunch of jihadists. Both the United States and Israel. In the United States, many of the Christian community is supposed to be parts and remnants of the different parts of the tribes of the house of Israel. And God shows you forgot the God of your salvation, and have not been mindful of the rock of thy stronghold. And how many Christians believe that Jesus Christ was the rock? So think about it. In that day of thy planting, thou didst make it to grow. In the morning, thou didst make thy seed to blossom, a heap of boughs in the day of grief and desperate pain, what you have brought upon the Syrian people. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Then we deal with the Palestinians. We see what's happening to them. Even the Druze community. I'm sure after Netanyahu's statement today, they feel more alienated than ever before. Right? So it's a trouble. Now, I want to quickly show, though, because if we look at Leviticus says, thou shalt not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. All right? Now, some would say, oh, that's only our people. Jesus dealt with that for my Christian friends, especially my evangelical friends that are supporting Israel wholeheartedly. You support a government that is not in line with the very values of biblical principle. They don't even love their neighbor as themselves. All right? Use wisdom. What does he say here? And he said unto him, what is written in the law? All right, first let's look at what the guy is actually asking him. All right. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said, what is written in the law? How readest thou? And he answered and said, you shall love the Lord thy God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said unto him, thou hast answered right. This do, and you shall live. But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, who is my neighbor? Sounds like today, doesn't it? Sounds like the same spirit going on in the political realms of Israel. Not all the political realms. And I'm not a leftist or a rightist in this case here. I'm for God's word. Right? And Jesus answering said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Isn't that interesting? Jerusalem to Jericho. A Palestinian city today. Palestinian city probably when they first came in. And fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. I'm sure a lot of Israelis today would say, that's what would happen if you go to Jericho today. Well, I've been to Jericho. I've also been down there when all the bullets were flying and everything else too, yes. All right. And by chance there came a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, sounds like a Palestinian to me, doesn't it? As he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. I've seen many Palestinians that are the most compassionate people you would ever imagine. They got love. They want to be free in their own way as well. They don't want to be oppressed. And in fact, God told Moses to tell us not to oppress the people because we were what? Oppressed at one time. We're supposed to know from our past what we went through, how to treat others. And when he saw him, he had compassion on him and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, brought him into an inn, took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, he gave them to the host, said unto him, take care of him, whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will pay you. Which now of these 3, think you, was neighbor unto him that fell among thieves? He said, he that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, go and do you likewise. The one that wasn't even a Jew. You remember what they were saying about the Samaritans? They had no dealings with one another. Same thing with Palestinian Jews today. No dealings with one another. But to love your neighbor as yourself is to treat him that way as well. All right? That's the way it is. Interesting, too, as well. This was sent to me by a precious brother today. World Israel News. Pope Christian anti-Semitism is rejection of one's own origins. Watch what he says in here. Pope Francis met with a delegation of 35 leaders from the American Jewish Committee on Friday in the Vatican, where he denounced anti-Semitism. Your commitment to Jewish-Christian dialogue goes back to Nostra Aetate, Declaration on the Relation of the Church with Non-Christian Religions of the Second Vatican Council, 1965, a milestone in our journey of fraternal reckoning, he told the delegation led by AGC President John Shapiro. Francis communicated great concern regarding bigotry against Jews and excessive and depraved hatred. I think especially of the outbreak of anti-Semitic attacks in various countries, he said. I stress that for a Christian, any form of anti-Semitism is a rejection of one's own origins and complete contradiction. Now, on our next Stephen and Yana chat, we're going to be going into how many acts of anti-Semitism have been self-inflicted in order to garner world sympathy. There's enough anti-Semitism in the world that we don't have to do that. There's also been a lot of crimes committed that had nothing to do with anyone else. And I am against anti-Semitism. I'm not for people that hate Jews and despise them, but this new law that they're passing in America, that the U.S. Congress already passed, no doubt Senate will pass, and Trump will sign it into law, that goes way beyond anti-Semitism. That law will enable them to silence free speech. That law states that we cannot tell you when there are crimes being committed by political leaders, by state officials. We cannot tell you of crimes committed by institutions if they are owned by Jewish community or by Jews themselves. None of these things could ever be revealed because it'll be deemed as anti-Semitism in America. That's completely wrong. It doesn't matter if the person is Jewish or not Jewish. If a government is committing crimes or doing evils, it should be called out. Just like we have Congress for being able to call out the higher powers of the president or the Senate to be a check and balance of our system. But what do we do then if we end up having a president and he's Jewish? Well, I have no problem with a Jewish president, but if you had a Jewish president and you have the anti-Semitism bill and the president begins to do things that are crimes against the nation, you can't say anything against it because it would be deemed anti-Semitism. The press could not report it because it would be anti-Semitism. We got to think how far and how nuts we're going in the world with things today. It's really crazy. Already happened, put this out here. Green Cove loaded with U.S. military hardware has just arrived at the port of Gibraltar. That's over in Gibraltar, Spain right there. Another large amount of military equipment making its way towards the Middle East there. They're getting ready for a war. Getting ready for a war. And it's just a matter of time before all this breaks out. Sputnik, it looks like now they're getting ready to start to dump all the trash on Trump. They're getting ready to start to expose him. Rub and tug, woman who sold access to Trump and family ran Florida sex spas. Florida U.S. state famous for bizarre stories now adds a newly hatched scandal involving a day spa charged with offering prostitutes to wealthy Trump donors while currently sidelining as a consultancy for heeled Chinese clients to purchase access to the U.S. president and his family. It goes into some very interesting things that are said in here. Her Facebook page, everything else has been removed, but Sputnik has put out a lot of information on here about the company that she has, her LLC, founded in 2017, and how that she is promising direct access to the president. There's a lot of pictures in here with the president's family, his son, other well-known members of the political circles, and interesting where we're going with these things. I don't really know. Also, footage contradicts U.S. claim that Maduro burned aid convoy. Now, if you remember, we mentioned this to you a little while back. That was because Ron Paul and Daniel McAdams with the Liberty Report had showed the footage of the actual, or who was the actual ones responsible for setting those aid convoys on fire. So I am surprised the New York Times is willing to actually publish this video on this. I think it's the same one that I've seen before, but you will see that it had nothing to do with Maduro's people.
An American aid convoy engulfed in flames at a border crossing between Colombia and Venezuela. The scene has become a critical flashpoint in the political and economic crisis gripping the country. Senior U.S. officials immediately seized on the incident, blaming President Maduro and his supporters
Marco
for intentionally
Rubio,
torching the convoy.
John Bolton.
But an
These are just
investigation by the
thugs.
Times calls its conclusion into serious question and shows that U.S. officials raced to judgment without the full facts. How did we get here? The Venezuelan crisis came to a head in early 2019, when opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself president in a bid to unseat Nicolas Maduro, whose authoritarian rule and economic mismanagement resulted in searing.
Now, this is, and let me see if I can pull it up real quick on YouTube. The State Department is now condemning any news media outlet that is speaking truth on these things. So we're almost out of time, so I'm going to play this so you can see what happened as we close. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching Israeli News Live.
That
Listen
some
to
outlets
this.
are incorrectly referring to Juan Guaido as the opposition leader or the self-proclaimed president. Neither is correct, relying on Venezuela's constitution. Juan Guaido became interim president of Venezuela on January 23rd. Millions of Americans and more than 50 countries recognize Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela.
Let me get this straight. You're complaining because news outlets are calling him by a title that you don't think that he...
Not a complaint, pointing out, just trying to correct.
Well, it sounds like a complaint to me, and that seems pretty weak.
He's the interim president,
Well,
and we don't
Well,
want
you
to.
consider him to be the interim president, and as you say, 50 other countries outside of him recognize him as the interim president. But there are more than 190 members of the United Nations, so your 50 countries is not even close to half.
It's the time to act and support
What a point.
of democracy.
What a point.
And
Not even close to 50% of the nations are supporting Juan Guaido as
The
president.
president is going to encourage more countries to
we
recognize.
don't want to feed into the rhetoric of the current dictator.
Okay.
In a similar vein, you
What an amazing journalist. I've watched this guy that's the journalist in there, and I wish I knew his name right off the top of my head, but he is always challenging the State Department in a very professional way. Shalom.